the fundamentals of project management. The aspect being that we have a review of the overall project management, the project life cycles, a issue regarding organisation, project successes, definitions, and project planning. The aspects that are basically for project management is that we have the basic definitions regarding what the actual systems do, the processes, the framework, the organisation structures, and the project planning. Now, the definitions of what a project is fairly clear and fairly well understood for the majority of the tasks within the field, and that is that it has an outcome. In other words, it has a series of activities that will give you the aspects where it has an outcome that didn't exist before. So it is a series of tasks that will create an object or a service that has both a beginning point, a construction or a design phase, and then an end. So the end is which makes it a temporary issue. So it isn't a continuous process. It isn't a thing. It is basically an effort by a team to actually have an outcome. Now, the project itself can be collected into a series of issues which we refer to as a program. Now, the program then may collect or be interrelated, or maybe just a series of sequencing. But the idea is that you have the ability to actually have a series of tasks and a project team that will go through all the different applications and then create an outcome. Now, the outcome are tasks that should be, or are objectives that should be fairly well defined, and they should be defined in at least 3 quality measures. And the quality measures being performance or functionality, the time by which it needs to be produced or needs to have resource expended to it, and the cost, which is the task cost up to the thing. So we have a project which has a series of steps. The steps have to be planned, executed, controlled in a way that will allow the aspects of the system to be used and also to be utilized to have an outcome. The constraints of the various aspects often ensure that the project itself has a task or an outcome that requires a resource to be used not to its full capacity, but generally to its part where it needs to be required to be used by other conflicting requirements. Okay. Now, the idea is that all the tasks need to be performed by a resource, and the resources are obviously human resources, so you have to make sure that it is then put to point. So the difference, and it has to be noted, that operations really can't be defined as a project because it is an ongoing task. But operations may involve setting up a project, running a project, and creating an outcome for operations. So that is quite common. So for instance, you may have a conveyor line, and the conveyor line which is used for production may have various stations of which operations, and what is required is that it requires another station, for instance, for packaging. And because the packaging project or the packaging machine doesn't exist or needs to be modified, but it doesn't exist in the form that is exactly there, we then have to go through the process and then decide on the task in terms of what is required to bring that function to the process, including a planning phase, a requirement phase, a design phase, a build phase, a commission phase, and then a operational phase. But the tasks will involve getting a series of points to actually go through and create an outcome. Okay, so that's the basic definition, and we'll come back to that particular example again and again during the presentation. Now, the process which the project management usually goes through is a process of initiation. In other words, on top of this, the idea is that you have a resource gathering. In other words, a requirement gathering rather than resource, a requirement gathering, which can be from many different sources. It can be from a particular operations. It can be from a marketing, a sales force. It could be from various customer-driven activities. But whatever it is, you have a requirement. The requirement then is estimated and is decided upon that it needs to be established. The establishment then requires an initiation. So what you're doing is actually creating the tasks or creating the requirements for the project to deliver a task. The tasks then have to be put into a project plan. So the project plan then works out a way, maybe not the most effective way, but definitely a way to create the outcome. So, and the outcome can be very, very simple or very, very complex, depending upon the nature of the project. It goes through the various places, various stages, and becomes a series of tasks. The tasks are then assessed for their criterion in what a success has to look like. In other words, what their quality aspects have to look like, including the performance or the functionality of the task. Does it meet its requirements? Does it meet the particular points? Then the aspects regarding the timeliness or the objective, then the cost, making sure that it is feasible and also economic for the task to go ahead. Then we go into an execution phase, which puts the task into a realizable form, and produces an outcome. So there is design phase, there is a build phase, there is an installation phase. Then we need to look at the testing phase, controlling, correcting, which always needs to go back to the original requirements. So the original requirements are there to satisfy the client's or the customer's requirement, but within it goes through a validation phase of checking against that. Then once the requirements are met, they then need to be handed over to the client, the customer, the operations, whoever the task is for and who commissioned the task, and then the project is effectively closed. And those steps, including the closure steps, define the scope of the project. And it's very important to define the scope in terms of a series of steps which have both a start and a beginning. Okay, so there are a few different types of project systems or a systematic approach that allow the various points to both have the requirements, and in fact the requirements could be based on environmental inputs. They need to define the set of inputs for each path, the outputs, the function of the task, and then how each of the different tasks are interrelated, the couplings and the transitions. So, for instance, if we had the conveyor that we mentioned earlier, then we start off with a series of configurations, which is prior to the system. So we have a configuration. Okay. Now, the wrapping machine or the packaging machine doesn't exist. So what we then do is ensure that it has at least a requirement. The requirement then is an aspect which needs to be altered and put forward, so that the systems are then realizable. Okay, so the realizable fact is that you then put the system through a systematic approach which both interrelates the existing equipment and the new equipment, and you go through a steps to create the final outcome, and those steps will be the design of the of where it needs to go, including modification of the existing equipment, brackets, mechanicals, etc. Then we discuss the the best design for the process. Okay, so we will look at all the regulatory constraints, the performance constraints, the materials handling constraints, the best technology in, for instance, the use of plastics. All of those are inputs to the process. They then have a outcome, in other words, a particular form of which the package needs to be presented in. So the machinery that creates that part is the project, not the ongoing process. Okay, so and that then becomes an important aspect. So there are a few references of which are considered to be best practice for project management, and there is a lot of international and national standards and guidelines regarding project management. And the typical things are really in two camps around the world. What is referred to as the US-based PMI or the UK-based APM. So, and there are conflicting resources and conflicting requirements, but they do give you a very clear definition on what the process is. Okay, so it's important to note that the systems do actually have a requirement that does actually have a consistent outcome, and there are some schools of thought and parts that will actually go through them. Okay, so one of the reference materials is what is referred to as the PM1FPM1. Now, the PM1FPM1 is basically a manual for project managers under a certain guidelines. The guidelines go through a process, and they give you the inputs, the tools, and the outputs, which describe the actual process. In fact, they are quite prescriptive of what the actual outcomes and what the documents have to be. So, including the form of documentation, which has the requirements. In fact, starting off with a functional requirement. The functional requirement, which is driven from the actual the client, then is defined in terms of their requirements, what their needs are, what are their stated objectives, what are the cost constraints, what are the time constraints, all of which are established prior to the initiation. Plus, there is a review, a generalized review through that, so it does give you a different point. Then the plans to implement the process and the designs of the process. Okay, so in that way that we have a series of tools that have mechanisms applied to the task to create the outcome. And it could be, for instance, if we're using the wrapping machine, it's a purchasing phase, it's a design phase. The design phase has to include mechanical movements, thermal processes, electrical infrastructure, structural adjustments, all of which are there to create the outcome. And constructional, obviously. The construction then goes through the various stages, and it has to be very logical about what the outcome is. It can't be random. It has to definitely be in a certain spot. And it then goes through a process where you apply it to the inputs of the process and then have the outputs accordingly. Okay. So the project life cycle is determined in terms of a series of structures, and the structures itself always have to go through a certain process. Now, because projects have been run for many, many years, in fact hundreds of years, there is a good understanding of the successful outcomes, and these have been defined more closely and through more intense study in the last, say, 50 years, through a nomination of the phases, and the generic phases being a initial requirement or the pre-feasibility, the feasibility which looks at the requirements and determines their economic, their performance characteristics, how they are to be used, how they are to be obtained, both in terms of cost and also timeliness. Once that has gone through an approval process, we then start to do the planning. The planning then works out the way to which the actual part is to be delivered. It is then, once that it has been agreed upon, passed to an implementation phase. The implementation phase then goes through a certain aspect to actually put the system together. So, in other words, you procure the tasks or the materials and also the resources. You organize them into a routine to be able to enact the design, program the software, etc. And at the end of it, you should have an established set of either tasks, goods, or services that can be delivered as a unit to the client. That client then, in combination with the vendor, then becomes a thorough testing process, and that's part of the final part of the implementation. The testing process, which should be done in various stages, but at least should have a final test to prove that to the customer, generally on their side or before acceptance, generally after delivery of the point. So it becomes commissioned, and then it has a handover phase and then a closeout phase. So the handover phase could include further testing to prove that the tasks and the requirements have actually been met, and that closeout will then put the tasks in a fashion that can be used by the client. Okay. So, best practice for any process at the moment, and this has been developed in the last 10 years, is that you have a gated process. In other words, a process that has a system that at various stages through the process or through the project can be stopped and has to be reviewed the progress up to that point. That progress up to that point then has to be given to a team member. The team member then goes through the process, okay, and then so we have the deliverables, which are very important to the gated process because they act as milestones, and the milestones are a process that needs to be delivered and also shown to be delivered to the team members and the stakeholders. And the team members have the right to stop the process if they aren't satisfied with both the quality of the outcome as well as the timeliness of the outcome. So it makes a enforced regulatory and quality steps in every point, and it gives a great benefit in that all the tasks are actually transparent. They give you a particular part. They isolate the tasks that are required of each of the participants in a way that will allow the sessions or the task to be, or the project to be very well managed. They have agreed outcomes, so they will. You do know what is required of the of each step. So in other words, you know what documentations, you know what services, you know what goods, you know what capabilities are required at the end, and they are always reviewed in terms of the three quality aspects of performance, timeliness, and cost. So once all the stakeholders, all the team members have agreed that a particular part or a service has been delivered, then you are able to continue on to the next part. But generally, you are the task is the progress has been halted or at least paused. Now, before you actually approve it. Now, the task or the process is flexible because at the end of each review phase, you can then alter the next review phase. In other words, you can, as new requirements come up, new difficulties are being resolved, the resources are being looked at in terms of the amount of expenditure, the timeliness. So you are able to change and alter the process as it goes along. And that is one of the key aspects of this particular process, is that it allows flexibility in both the project running but as well as the outcomes. Now, by ensuring that you do have a review and approval and a regular authorization to approve, it definitely makes it inclusive. So all the stakeholders are involved in the process. So what do these look like? They are defined as barriers for progress, and each barrier must have a approved and agreed to set of deliverables. Now, this is a particular section which is fairly generic, but it does follow the previous states of a particular project. So, in other words, we have a series of steps which culminate into a gate. Now, the gate itself is the analogy that you have to keep the gate closed before the next progress can occur. So hence you have a series of gates which activities occur before getting to the gate, and at the gate you have to create or prove that you have produced a series of deliverables, which then have to be approved by the team for the gate to be then passed. Okay, so for gate 1, it's a requirement phase where you have a marketing specification requirement. The gate 2 is generally an engineering phase, or a design phase, or the transition from a requirement into a design, and generally you have costings at that particular point. The third is the engineering phase, where the design review, the proof of concepts, and possibly the task is to be ready for manufacture. If you're building a new product or building a new task, it is creating that process. Then you go through a manufacturing phase, an implementation phase, possibly a phase that allows the particular part to be tested, and in other words, running prototypes. And then finally, a commissioning phase, a handover to the client, and with all the documentation that is required for it. Okay. Now, this particular thing is producing a product or a product for manufacture. It isn't producing the product; it's getting it ready for manufacture, and it can be as simple as a paperclip, or as complex as a multi-story building. Okay, so it's important that it can be used in any project that is required. Okay, so in detail, the gated process allows the owner to have their inputs. In other words, who the client is, the customer. Now, what occurs is that each gate has a person responsible, not a committee, not a task, a person that is responsible for the outcomes to be delivered. Okay, so the deliverables to actually be correct in the form that can be reviewed. So in gate 1, the customer is the owner of the output. So it could be from a third party, it could be from an internal customer, it could be from various points. But anyway, whichever it is, you have a set of documentations that puts a requirements into place. So in other words, it gives you a specification on how the system is to be sold, a marketing requirement, a marketing specification, a requirement specification, in other words, what the customer wants from the task, what the various features that are required, how many, what are the production rates, what are the main features, and also detailed features of the outcome, the building, for instance. At that case, the customer will have a good understanding of the costing. So you need to have a business case developed. In other words, is the task actually worth doing? Okay, and remember, there are various drivers for why outcomes are produced, and they could be economic outcomes, they could be culture outcomes, they could be public service outcomes. but the idea is that you have to justify why those outcomes have been used. Okay, so and that's where the scrutiny becomes an important aspect, that you create a business case. Now, the business case doesn't have to be purely financial, although it does rely heavily on the finances. It could, and at that time you also have a team structure put together. Okay, so in other words, you know, maybe not the names, but you know the functions that are required for the project resources to be utilized to drive the project forward. Okay. The next gate is the ownership of the customer engaging with the engineering department. Now, the engineering department or some technical department has to review in combination with the customer, and it's generally an iterative step. In other words, the customer presents a certain aspect, the engineers then, or the technicians or the implementers, then review that documentation, create suggestions, create alterations, which the client then approves or disapproves. So you have this iterative process, and after that you will create a document which usually gives you the ability to be implemented based upon the best knowledge of the actual process. So, for instance, if we're building a large or the packaging machine, then the customer may say that they want a certain throughput rate, they want a certain volume given. The volume of the product is as the thing, so they are given, say for instance, a description, maybe in drawing, of the actual final product. It then has certain construction requirements. It may be made out of cardboard, may be made out of wood, it may be made out of whatever, but remember, it's not the actual packaging that we're making, it's the machine and the service to create the packaging. So there has to be materials handling, there have to be dispensing of raw material. So all of that has to be put into place, and the suppliers, the vendors, know how to deliver that type of equipment, and they know the limitations, and they know the how to actually fit to the customer's needs. So that way you have a specification of a possible machine. Okay, then the machine is costed out, and a feasibility study is then put in place. Okay, in other words, is this machine firstly viable to be made? In other words, is the performance possible? Technically, is it possible? Is the costing well above the budget of the client? And is the timeliness in line with the client's requirements? Okay, so that's why you have this collaboration at this stage, to firstly get agreement, but also to get a better clarification of what is required. It goes, once that is done, the feasibility is required, is approved. We then have a design phase, initial design phase. A project plan is put together. The task is actually put in a graphical form, or even in an estimation form via the, in other words, the work breakdown structure is established, and a Gantt chart can be then drafted, at least at the initial stage, and the cost estimate is then put there. So at the gates of this particular process include all the documents that you see here. And if they're not delivered, then the things. Now, depending upon the project, you can eliminate some of the suggestions here, or you can add to them, whatever is the most appropriate for the project. Okay. The next stage then gets handed over to engineering to do their complete part. And there's very little at this stage interaction with the customer. You have a good understanding of the of what is required. It then progresses through the various stages: the design phase, the review phase, prototyping, and there could be, for instance, issues that come up during this gate that needs to be consulted to the customer about decisions about the implementation or the design. But the control is definitely within the engineering, and at the end of it, the customer will see a series of outcomes. It could be drawings, it could be prototypes, it could be production readiness, whatever it is. It is there, that thing, and a series of tasks have been expended, material has been used up. So the engineering then has the designs, the testing to prove that it actually has met the original requirements. Once that has been approved by the team, okay, then the next gate can be progressed to, and that is where the transition to the building phase becomes an important aspect. Okay, so if you're creating a large packaging machine, you would then start to procure all the different parts. The tasks, for instance, may be partly installed or partly designed. They are then finished. The design, or the design will be finished. Installation, finish the assembly, and that then gets put to the installations, and if not installed, at least at the customers, at the vendor site. And typically you may see a factory acceptance test occur as part of this process. Okay, so now it then, once the customer agrees to the task, now remember, you're continually referring back to the process, continually referring back to the requirements to actually have an outcome. So that's where this occurs. So once the next parts, the installation has occurred, you then need to go through a testing phase on site. So this becomes an IAT, or installation acceptance test, where engineering still does have, the engineering or the vendor still has the contractual control over the system, but has to prove to the customer the worthiness, the validation of the initial specs, and then the engineers or the vendor has to provide documentation for the ongoing operations and maintenance of the system. So it becomes really important that any type of documentation and also proof of delivery is there, so that the customer can then take ownership Okay, so that's the part, and this is getting very close to the end of the project and the beginning of the actual operation. So then once we've gone through this gate, then the ownership then reverts back to, or the ownership reverts to the customer, and the customer then takes full operational procedures over it. So at this point, notionally, the contract now ceases. Okay, but it's very important that the tasks are put in a very controlled fashion. There is always a definite point where the system has to be reviewed, approved, and then allowed to go on. And it's that review step, approval and authorization, that creates a very, very good project. That's the main part. Okay, not that, yes, the gate is there, is the mechanism to allow the review to occur in an organized fashion and a very determined fashion, but it is there as the review, as the process step only. Okay. Now you can run a project without this part, but it isn't best practice. Okay. So the organization teams within a project can be many and varied, and generally project teams are collected together for a specific purpose, and then they are then disbanded. Now that is different to a functional organization, which generally has a stable system, a stable organization. The members do know exactly who the members are, and are generally long-term tasks. Okay. There are continual tasks, there may be operational tasks, there may be tasks that are repeated once again, but the idea is that they are different to the projects, and because the project then, now what the organizational chart, or the functional chart, also has similar skilled people within a department. Engineering has engineers, marketing has marketing people, sales has sales people, finance has finance people. So they all have similar type of background, similar type of requirement, similar types of skill sets, whereas a project derives their team members from a lot of different functional groups. In other words, they grab management, they grab sales, they grab engineering, they get finance, they get procurement, logistics, etc., human resources, all of which are collected as a temporary group into a project and then create the task. Okay, so, and often the tasks aren't given to one set of teams. They are often driven by functional people using in a matrix structure, and that's where the organization structure is. So you can have a matrix structure which grabs the different people from different aspects. Okay, and there are various gradings of matrix. So what a matrix does is, as I mentioned before, it takes temporarily a personnel and uses their resources from the functional part and uses it within the task. So the idea is that sometimes there are nominated personnel who one of their their tasks within their functional group is to be involved in projects. Okay, so that becomes a strong matrix structure. So it's important that, yes, the project manager does have the responsibility for the task that the functional person has to contend with, but they don't have the direct day-to-day relationship or day-to-day dealing with them. In other words, they don't deal with their personnel issues, their HR issues. That is done by the functional group, but the organization structure does take care of that. Okay. So the project teams do come together, and not only do you have internal project teams, you can have both external and internal project teams. For instance, you may have gaps in your project team's capabilities, so you need to bring in contractors, consultants, suppliers, all of which are very specific in what they're required to do, and only are established within the project team for a very defined period of time, very defined period of activity. So you may have an electrical contractor who is only there to install wiring, and there comes in and then leaves. They don't get involved in the day-to-day running of the project or anything. They are just there to do the task. Once the task has been completed to a satisfactory level, they then leave. The consultants, depending upon their expertise, may consult on one particular aspect. The amount of material, etc., and the suitability of certain machinery, the best way to produce something. But once they've completed their task, then they hand over documentation or a product and then leave. Okay, so that's the big thing about you. You have a relatively stable manager and some of their support teams, but the rest are definitely transient members. Okay, and you can have both a vertical organization or a hierarchical organization. It doesn't really matter, but understanding where they all fit in the one spot becomes an important aspect. So each one does have a key to success, and project managers do go to great lengths to ensure, or should go to great lengths to ensure, that everyone knows what a good outcome is and what a bad outcome is. Okay, so and they are put in terms of criterion for success. So you should involve all the stakeholders to determine and to enforce the criterion. So in the packaging machine, you must know what a good outcome is, that it initially goes and has a full requirement specification. In other words, it has the ability to wrap all the product that is required, and then each one of them is judged against the three aspects. And remember, the quality aspects have become a very, very important aspect. The performance on, getting the system to do what is required. It is within cost and within budget. So by defining each of those criterion, you do by direct, explicit actions create a success criterion. Okay, so but not only in terms of the cost, they should also the timeliness or the functionality. They should also be in terms of safety, the relationships of the team, and your reputation as well. So it's important to note that both the project criterion, but as well as the organizational criterions are also followed. So the benefits for a PM on criterion is that they have improved planning, and they have a basis for performance measures and a trade-off if required. So success factors are unfortunately commonly overlooked. They need to be managed to get the best outcome, and really come down to a implementation strategy. But what they do have is success factors that directly relate to the project manager and the team, the customer's organization, and the external environment. So make sure that they are defined in every aspect that has been mentioned, and including what is the tolerable levels. So that is another important aspect. Okay. So project plans can be quite extensive, but you always must have an eye to consistency, and that's where the quality then comes off. So making sure you do have statement of objectives, a project charter, a project plan, which includes the definitions, the work breakdown structures, the organizational structures, the task management, the assignment, and the project plans become an important aspect. Okay, so the procedures and the control then go through a administration phase, the quality aspects, the timeliness, the ability to manage risk, and making sure that the communications do have a good understanding and how each of the procedures are there to do the communications, and thereby the procurement. Okay, so when we do have the overall structure and the overall part of a particular project, we need to make the project plan, and the project plan has various components, but the first major component is breaking down the large task into smaller tasks, what is referred to as a work breakdown structure, and it has assignment of tasks and programming, but also there is various parts to that work breakdown structure, including the schedule, the organization requirements, the scope of each of the projects, or each of the steps, and the large steps, and all the objectives. So a work breakdown structure is critical to the success of most of the, or in fact all projects, because it then uses a high level understanding and then breaks that down. So for instance, you want to make a, and the idea is that it's based upon the type of work, the responsibility, the location, but you should identify what the outcomes in other words, what the work has to occur. And really, that should be independent at this particular stage of the resources or the sequences. Okay, so it's make sure that the tasks are logical. Then work out the hierarchical structure, how they interrelate to each other. Are they subtasks? What are the deliverables? And the criterion for a work breakdown item should be that it is sensible in its logic. It should have really a very consistent effort and resource to be allocated. So in other words, roughly around about 5% of the total point. So in aspects, you should end up with at least 20 different task for a particular point, and each one of those should have an equal amount of effort and also resource to be allocated to it, because then it becomes a manageable task. Okay. So an example of a work breakdown structure could be, for instance, you want to start a restaurant. Okay, that's the customer's requirements. That's what the thing. So you then work out the best way to do that. Okay, and one of the best ways to do it is actually have a plan as far as the customer is concerned to be the process. So in other words, you have a purchasing, or you have an execution, design, and the startup phase. Okay, that's the first breakdown level. You then go to the next level and break down its parts into purchasing, installation, labor, advertising. You're designing the product, process, specific needs, and then you start it up. So you can see how each one then, by a full understanding of the requirements, which often involves an interface to the customer. Remember, the customer knows what they want, and they can help you produce this outcome. So you have a breakdown of example. Then you look at the breakdown in terms of who will do the task once the process is up and running, so that there are a few different ways to create the outcome, and that is from an operational point of view. In other words, you put the process as if it is a final task. Okay, and this is one view of how the work breakdown structure can occur. The other view is who will, as far as the team is concerned, what will occur. Okay? In other words, the labor, the purchasing, the startup, the design, all of which are held in task breakdown from the experts. In other words, there will be an expert in labor preparation, purchasing, design, product design, construction, all of which as far as the allocation to the team. Okay, so another work breakdown structure, and again, these are dependent upon each project, and the choice of which depends upon the capabilities of each of the members. So you then have a subsystem-based allocation. In other words, the kitchen, for instance, is used, and what are all the steps to create the kitchen? What are all the steps to create the dining room? So you can see, even though the headings may be similar, but their details are significantly different. Okay. Also, you could be allocate them and organize it in terms of logistics. In other words, what the food preparation is, what the facilities, what the operations. So even though the outcome will be a functional unit, how you actually organize the intermediary tasks is quite a flexible part, and there are definitely many choices there. And but one of the most common types on most projects for people who generally don't have a good understanding of the process, and this is one of the failing points of a lot of project managers, is that they see a task, it is presented to them by their team for a particular thing, and they immediately revert to a timing aspect. In other words, go through the classical project management part. So yes, they start off with the design and then through execution and then through operation. So again, if the timing aspect is the most important aspect and the project manager is very comfortable at doing this, that's what it will run. So the flexibility is there, but there are different aspects. So it depends upon what is the success criteria. Is the outcome more important to create a good restaurant or to create a restaurant on time opening? So that's the important aspects, okay, and how you would organize the work breakdowns. So the options are the team's choice. The successful criteria is that based upon the team's capabilities, irrespective of that, a good definition is essential. The task must always have a quality review step for performance, costing, timeliness. They must have a defined start, and inputs to the process or the task. In other words, the task from the task before the actual task. So no task is ever in isolation. So you do have the task that we've seen. So this may be, for instance, an electrical design of the packaging machine. Before that, there would be a mechanical design, and after that, there would be an electrical construction. So you can see that each part will interrelate. Okay, but the process itself is very clearly defined. In other words, what you want to produce as the outcome, and that outcome then has to go to the next step. And then once that outcome has occurred, then the step itself, the work breakdown structure, is also closed. That's the thing, is that you are closing steps as you go along. Okay.